Welcome to the Forged by Trust podcast. I'm your host, Robin Dreek, executive coach, former U.S. Marine, spy recruiter, best-selling author, and your trust and communication expert. Today's episode, the Conversation Codex, is brought to you by my close friend, best-selling author, master interrogator, and behavior expert, Jim Pyle, and his upcoming book, Body Talk, The Big Kid's Guide to Body Language, being released in the fall of 2023. Coming up next on the Forged by Trust podcast.
It's all about trust. So there's two things that people will not give you freely: money and information.
Right.
In sales, you get the money. In interrogation, you get the information. That interrogation is nothing but sales.
Right.
It's just sales. And I can do that because, again, you can lead a horse to water, can't make them drink.
Right.
But if you make them thirsty, they'll drink all by themselves. And that's really the interrogator's job, is to get somebody to want to do something.
Welcome to the show. I'm Robin Dreek, and on the Forged by Trust podcast, we decode the interpersonal communication skills of the world's most acclaimed forgers of trust. We unlock the skills and techniques from spies, spy recruiters, master interrogators, globally recognized behavioral experts, C-suite executives, entrepreneurs, acclaimed authors, and thought leaders. Each episode provides specific actions that you can immediately apply to any aspect of your personal or professional life. Today's episode, the Conversation Codex, is with my good friend and patriot, Jim Pyle. It was 1950, 2 years before rock and roll music, that Jim Pyle of Wood River, Illinois, began his journey that brings him to the Forged by Trust podcast. He caught his rambling fever in the backseat of a car that found its way across America, due in part to lost jobs and lost opportunities his family was all too well accustomed to. The last of 5 kids, Jim would start from the ground up on his many jobs and businesses by shining shoes at a local barbershop in Paramount, California, stocking auto and truck parts, all the while dreaming of racing cars someday at the world-famous Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Dreams turn into a reality, and redirection takes him to Bible college and ministry back in the Midwest. It built a sound foundation for his next variation of himself as a funeral home assistant and then cemetery before need counselor, fancy term for salesman, for the renowned Southern California Forest Lawn Memorial Park. Sales turned to sales training, and then a return to the Midwest to manage 3 local cemeteries and take on another life-influencing job as radio announcer and DJ for 2 radio stations, one in Kentucky, WBCE, and the other in Missouri, KDEX. All the jobs and business ventures never turned to careers till after the Marine Corps barracks bombing in Beirut, Lebanon, 1983 turned his attention towards the military, and a 20-year career found its roots January of 1984 as an interrogator trainer, resistance to interrogation support, strategic debriefing instructor, and a post-military career of interrogation, strategic debriefing, elicitation, and advanced negotiations and mediations for all special operations services. Jim reflects on his most significant assignment of the J-2 Joint Intelligence of the Joint Staff of the Pentagon, headed by General Colin Powell in the Colombia, Venezuela branch, engaged in the hunt for Pablo Escobar and the war on drugs. 22 years active duty military service, nearly 20 years post-retirement military training, produced 2 books, Find Out Anything About Anybody, Anytime, and Control the Conversation. Jim invented a device for intelligence collectors who need interpreter support that was awarded an uncontested patent in 2014, the Electronic Language Simulator System and Process. During today's episode, we talk about a lifelong passion for understanding how things work, what makes a great friendship, commonalities we all share, becoming a powerful observer, and creating your conversation codex. Jim Pyle, the man, the legend, the person who intimidates me so much.
Oh my gosh, I can't bear that.
I know that's why you are so amazing, because one of the greatest traits you have is fantastic humility, which is great for everything in life.
Well, I get to hang with great people, and that works for me. That works for me.
Isn't that the truth? Hanging with great people is the greatest gift that any of us can have. And part of that, I think, is really recognizing that you're surrounded by great people, which requires that great humility.
Mm-hmm.
Because no, you're not playing that game of one-upsmanship or trying to outdo someone else's skills or levels or experiences. So again, humility. Fantastic. So, Jim, we've chatted numerous times, but my whole audience hasn't had you for all those times. So I do want to go back, and I'd love to explore first, as you probably know, the backstory, the origin story, the spark that started your journey to being
literally a world-renowned interrogator, interviewer, and operator. And so I was curious, what was that spark all those years ago? What's your origin?
Wow. Well, I started out as a child, and
I want to hear about it. I do.
I was the last of 5 kids, and I think that is an origin for a lot of who I am, how I got to be where I am. When you're the last of 5 kids, you struggle for your attention, you struggle for your position, your place, because right now you're the last when you get started. And with that,
and I'm sorry, I'm doing it already. What was the first struggle you remember as being the last of 5?
wow, when my brothers and sisters went off to school and I was still the last one home, and I realized, that I'm the last in line for whatever comes down the line. And so then also later in life, I realized that I'm the last one standing almost too. So when I was lonely as a kid, left behind, I had that same loneliness as an adult, left behind, in kind of a sad way, but really those are the things that helped me develop to be who I am today, because I've looked for my place to be.
That loneliness that you experienced back then, what did that force you into thinking?
I think tried to endear myself to my brothers who were my age. My sisters were like 10 years older than me. And so they were kind of a distant. For a long time, I just thought there was me and my brothers, because my sisters were so much older. But it made me to endear myself to them, because they were my friends of the family.
Right.
The family was affected by a lot of things in a negative way, and we kind of bound ourselves together in a defensive manner and an offensive manner too. But that helped me to learn how to relate to people, to get people to want to be with me and let me be with them.
What were some of the things that, if you don't mind me asking, that were the negative things that you were exposed to that made you bind to your brothers?
Well, we were all post World War II kids, okay, boomers, and there was a lot of alcoholism post-war. I don't know if I can blame it on the war, but certainly it was more accepted. It was more the norm,
right?
And it really affected our home. And for that reason, I never drank alcohol till I was 30 years old.
Right.
And
very similar.
I always make this joke. I said, well, I guess I've caught up. But really, it was the reason why I didn't do a lot of things. And I credit my family for some of that, because that protected me through the 60s and the love generation, blah 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 blah.
Right.
So that I found kind of a self-applied shield that carried me through some very energized times to be who I am today still, so that I think that there was a lot of energy and some negativity and some bad impact, but I'm a survivor of all that, and I'm the best person from that.
Absolutely. And you mentioned to endear yourself to your brothers. What types of things did you do to endear yourself to your brothers?
Well, my oldest brother was like baseball, and I'm not. I have no depth perception. I didn't know that for 50 years. Wow. And that's why when I played ball, I'd run up and it'd go over my head, or I'd run back and it'd fall in front of me. And they never wanted me to, to play on their team. And if I got up to bat, they'd say, well, just don't swing the bat. Maybe they'll walk you.
Right. Or hit you.
A ball player, So I didn't get into the stick and ball sports. But my next brother up, Richard, he and I discovered race cars. And it was on the 31st of May, 1963, when we sat on opposite sides of an old General Electric one-speaker clock radio, and we heard the Indianapolis 500 for the first time. And Sid Collins announced that race, and I'd never been there. I'd never seen those cars, but I saw them, and I was there through that broadcast.
Why do you remember the date? That's crazy. That's amazing.
Because my brother and I were never the same kids after that day.
So the same impact on him.
That was a watershed day.
And so tell me about that experience. I mean, for both of you to share that kind of profound experience where you both remember that moment, What do you remember? Smells? Where were you? I mean, that's really pretty incredible. And how old were you at the time again?
I was 12.
That is incredible.
And so, we were in Paramount, California. My folks had moved there. My dad lost another job in Illinois, so we had to move. And then we moved to the West Coast and all the potential that was there. And so we were two kids who were close in age, 2 years apart, and we needed something outside the home for us to focus on, to find our, not an escape, but to find our island
Right.
of hanging out and being. And it was race cars and cars. And I credit that those kind of things for keeping me out of trouble, because every dollar I ever had, I spent on a car and
Right.
going to the races, and not on anything else.
Wow. And so what were the next steps after you discovered this passion with your brother that started moving forward?
Well, in my book, the introduction to Find Out Anything from Anybody Anytime,
Which I love.
we just didn't want to know race cars and cars. We wanted to know what made them work. And we asked Dad if we could look at the engine in his car. And he said, yeah. And we were out there for a couple hours. And we decided, in that process, that looking at the engine was interesting. We took off the air cleaner and we saw the carburetors, took it off. We saw the intake manifold and we took it off. And we were thinking, man, a little bit more, we can see pistons. And that's about the time my dad decided it was awful quiet around the house and he should check up on us. And we had broken the head bolts loose on one side of the engine, hoping to take that off to look at the pistons in the engine. And I can't tell you the trouble we were in. It was the only car we had, and we had already dismantled part of it. And you just don't put it back together and it'd be okay. We had to buy additional gaskets and parts and put it back together and all.
Did you
So
put it back together, or did you have to get someone else?
No. We had rudimentary tools, and we got us that far. We could put it back together, and it was a learning experience.
Yeah, it was. That's fantastic. So we have this initial spark of curiosity. We have this desire to be liked, and because we're feeling lonely,
A need, yeah.
Oh, so what's it? So you use that word need.
Mhm.
Describe that feeling of need. Was there a difference between need and want?
Yes.
What is it?
It's very internal.
Mhm.
My brother Richard was a better student than me, and he got a lot of attention that way. And I was just a nominal student, but I showed up and went to school and did all the things I was supposed to do. But there was a need, because sometimes it's cold to be alone. Sometimes it's dark to be alone, and sometimes it happens inside, even in broad daylight.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, even in a crowd of people. So I found myself there most of my life. And I look back now and I can see it, and I can manage it when it comes to visit from time to time. I took a class from a gentleman called Avinam Sapir,
Mhm.
and the first thing he did was to have us write down what happened yesterday, yesterday morning, just to get a different view. And he looked at my first couple of paragraphs where I described my wife leaving to go to the airport. And the first thing he says, "You don't like to be alone, do you?"
Huh.
And I said, "Yeah, how do you know?" He said, "Because you talk about your wife leaving, not that she was going, but that she was leaving and you were left behind." And he was so quick to understand. And I was so easy to reveal, I guess,
Yeah.
that personal part of it.
It's another amazing skill that engenders and forges great trust. And you're doing it right now, and you did it then as well. This transparency and willingness to be vulnerable. Were you always willing to be vulnerable and transparent with people, or were you closed up? Was there an event that caused that to happen?
Willing to be, I just was.
Right.
I didn't make it happen. Probably wasn't aware of it as I am now looking back.
Right.
And with the people I've talked to, and the things I've learned in the school I've taken, I can look back and see. I wouldn't change all of that,
Right.
because I wouldn't be where I am today. A left turn when I should have made a right would have changed all of this.
Right.
An introduction to a person that I would have missed would have changed all of this. And I look back, and we're talking today, and I talked yesterday with some individuals, and I traveled the other day down to Fort Bragg, and I look back and said, this is just crazy how it all comes to be this good at the end. Kind of a winding road, but it's clear looking back how I got here.
Sounds like you really learned to value certain things more than others. And so what gives you that great joy and happiness now?
The real friendships. I have family, and those are binding. And I have a great wife, and I have great kids. But the friendships that are not required, that are not, binding,
right?
That still endure, and they're as strong as any relationships I have with great friends. And the military, we always have military connectivity, and most of my friends, even though I was only in the military for 20 years, are still military guys.
Right. Oh yeah.
I'll travel 150, 200, 500, in this last case 700 miles to see in Atlanta last weekend. I saw Greg Hartley, I saw a friend, Ulysses Bully Hayes. And so these are the guys I go see when I need to see them, and when I have the opportunity to see them. And those friendships are just the best.
I'm always doing my best to be more Jim-like and only ask one question at a time, because so many things keep popping up as you're speaking. So I'll go with the first that popped in my mind, and then hopefully I'll remember the second. What makes a great friendship?
Well, they see me first. Okay.
And what do they see when they see you?
Well, they acknowledge me, where I am, who I am at the time, and then they give it value with their conversation. They give it value with their attention. They give it value sometimes with buying a drink or a meal, or they nurture it. I spent a lot of time making friends and having friends that weren't really always friends. And so you discern the difference between those acquaintances that are nice and good, but the friends are the ones that call you and check up on you, see how you're doing, offer you things, opportunities, offer you time. They give time, and that's a valuable commodity. You can't put a dollar sign on the time that people will give you, friends will give you.
So
and I try to give it back just as equal or more.
As you were speaking about all the things that make a great friendship, I'm thinking, wow, I guarantee you give all those things in triplicate on the way back, which makes great friendship. All those things with no ask from anyone.
Yeah. I try to leave behind more than I take away.
Always.
Do.
Another thing you said, when you need to travel to see them, what makes you need to travel to see them?
You really have great questions. I like your questions. Okay.
It's your content. You're saying it. I'm just listening.
I have a license plate on my car, and it's 2 words from a Merle Haggard song, a song that will be played at my funeral someday. A very inappropriate song for a funeral, but it's got to be played because it is true of me. My license plate says Ramblin' Fever.
Ramblin' Fever.
Yeah. And I have it. I have that where the road is my greatest friend as I go visit friends. The road's the greatest friend as I go to work for places and travel. Debbie and I next week will travel to a wedding in Arkansas. We're going to drive.
Oh, beautiful.
Everybody else will fly, but we'll drive because we enjoy the road. It's time together, traveling. And sometimes we might not talk for hours, but we're traveling together. And it's great therapy. Sometimes I travel hundreds of miles, don't have the radio on. Just me and the road in the car.
What do you find therapeutic about it? Is it bringing you back to a different period of time in your life, or is it a moment?
It takes me to an exact period of time in my life.
Oh, what was it?
It's going to be the first week of October, 1960. And you mentioned I told you that we moved to California. Well, my dad lost work, and we kind of packed up everything we owned in a little tow behind trailer, and it wasn't even a tall trailer. It was just a little pull behind trailer, and that's all we ever had for 5 of us, with a bicycle tied on top. And we took off from Alton, Illinois,
Whose
which is
bicycle was it?
It was my brother Richard's bicycle.
Okay.
We didn't have room for mine, and we let it go.
Oh my
So
God.
his was the most valuable, and I could grow up to it. And so anyway, that I don't want to get melancholic here, but out of Alton, Illinois, 10 years old, 3 kids crying in the back seat because we're leaving behind cousins and grandparents, and only home we knew. And now we're going somewhere we don't know anybody, we don't know anything about it. There's, we spent the first hour or two feeling sorry for ourselves.
Right.
And then I looked out the window, and from Missouri to a little bit of Kansas to Oklahoma to Texas to New Mexico, Arizona to California, I don't think I slept.
Huh.
Day and night we drove. We didn't stop in hotels and restaurants to eat. It was a sojourn of sorts.
Right.
And we had limited meal stops and those kind of things. And 3 boys in the back seat, don't touch me, you're looking at me, quit looking at me, that kind of thing. But I looked out the window and I saw America change right before my very eyes.
Huh.
And every state was different. Every state was interesting. And it was the adventure of adventures for a 10-year-old kid. I saw my first shooting star in the night sky of Arizona. And I get out every night that they have a meteor shower, and I stand out in the night, 3 a.m, and hope to see some more, still to this day. And so that trip was, it was on Route 66,
Right.
back when it was a 2-lane highway.
Yeah.
And I've revisited that route many times. And every time I get a new car, I take it on that route. Yeah. And me and that car make that trip with those memories.
Isn't it so fascinating that such a traumatic time in your life that was full of melancholy, as you said, became your most therapeutic activity you do for the rest of your life?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And all of my kids want me to take them individually on that trip, so I can tell them the things that I see. I like going places I've been before. I like going places I've never been before.
Yeah.
One of those has a different interest to me, but I really do have to go back and visit those feelings, go back and visit those places.
Yeah.
And it's a touchstone to who I am.
Yeah. So Jim, did you ever see yourself as a victim in these moments?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yep. I will tell you, looking back, how terrified I was riding in a car with parents who were intoxicated to the extent of almost falling asleep at the wheel, and I had to wake them up to make sure we get where we're going. How many times that happened, I can't tell you. The times I've laid awake at night wondering if my parents would be coming home and they wouldn't be in an accident or something would happen. So every weekend, it was a weekend, a cyclical thing. Every weekend was those fears of something happening to them, being left alone. As my older brothers all married and moved on, I was the last kid in the house, and I was very alone. And that lonely really had to be dealt with.
Did your father total many cars?
Oh, amazingly, the alcohol in the family seemed to be managed amazingly well, in that no serious car crashes and no fatalities and no hospitalizations.
Fortunate.
But the fear of that and the potential of that was out of this world.
When did you shift from going from feeling like a victim to feeling control, if it ever happened?
Well, I left the home to go to college. Religion found me. I didn't find religion.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Okay, but that took me out of the house.
Right.
That was my first ticket to ride. I'd been to my brother's wedding in Illinois. I was the best man, and he'd come back from Vietnam. And he got married.
Richard? I'm sorry.
No, it was my brother Terry, the older brother.
Okay.
And he'd gotten back from Vietnam, and he got married. And the family preacher that was familiar to us, we didn't do church much, but who was familiar to us was a very nice guy by the name of J.W. Jordan. And so at the wedding, he talked to me, about the religious, recruiting and the converting and all of that. And that was interesting. And he was a nice guy, and he made me comfortable with it. And then when I came back home after that, he told me about the college in St. Louis and that he thought I would be a good fit for that. And that's the first time somebody said, we're looking at you for who you're going to be, not who you are.
What made him think you would be a good fit for that? What did he see in you?
I think I learned to talk well as a young person,
Sure.
to talk to adults.
Sure.
And I was entertaining. I think I like to make people laugh again, because that the greatest comedians have sometimes the most tragic lives.
Right.
And my life wasn't tragic, but it certainly was stressed.
Right.
And so I was looking for any, good attention and good intentions.
Right.
And he gave me lots of attention that way. And so it sounds good to me. They want me to go to the school, I'll go, and packed up. And at age 18, I stayed out of high school a year, worked, and then I went to college. And that also put me into a different situation where I became somebody else's expectations.
Right.
For about 7 or 8 years, going to a Bible college and preaching in little churches in southern Illinois and Missouri and around. And I was just telling people what things people told me, not what I knew by experience and by knowledge.
Right.
And so I did that well. I tell people I was a poor preacher. That was mostly just by money. But, I think I did well. I intended to do well, but it wasn't taking care of me.
Right. What did you learn the most about those years? I mean, 7 or 8 years, that's a good length period of time. And that's a lot of reps in 7 or 8 years. What were some of the most profound things that you learned about yourself in those years?
The commonality of everybody's experience.
Ooh.
That most everybody experiences the same thing I do and you do.
Right.
It's just how we manage it. And, in the situation I was exposed to weddings and funerals and family issues and young people's troubles. And so I was too young to be able to really influence that, but I was aware of that and I learned from that. And when I left the preaching, because I went to 4 years, three of those 4 years of college, I was earning $50 a week, and with a wife and a child, $50 a week. And when I graduated, they gave me a $5 raise. That was hard living. That was living without the things I liked, the things I wanted. And I realized if I'm going to do the things I want to do and have the things I like and be the person I want to be, I can't do it here.
So you said that a couple of times, be the person you want to be. And so you had 7 or 8 years of doing a vocation that wasn't fulfilling in some way.
Mm-hmm.
What did you feel was missing?
You're asking me questions I have never thought before. but what was missing was I never really got to find out. I never got to exercise my dreams. I was always in a box.
Do you remember what your dreams were back then?
Well, I was going to be a race car driver.
We're a little off. All right, good.
But I was living in Illinois, and that was close to Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and that was close to Terre Haute, and stuff. But I didn't get to go to the races because all the races are on Sunday. And when I finally decided, I live 150 miles from Indianapolis, I'm going to take this Sunday off and call that my vacation time, and I'm going to the races. Uh-huh. And you just don't know how people perceive that so negatively. When for me it was so important to be a part of it.
Right.
Finally get to it, to because it connected way back to some real, tissue.
Right.
If I say that, so that I realized that if I'm going to be me, I better just try to find a new way to be me, a new place to be me. And I went up to Decatur, Illinois, and I became a salesman at a cemetery up in there. And they had a whole new program they needed to sell. And I sat at the feet of Fairchild, Mr. I can't tell you his first name, Fairchild. And he taught me how to sell cemetery property. And out I went, And then when you're a salesman, a commission salesman, if you don't sell, you don't eat. So You're motivated very, very well to sell. And I sold cemetery property there. But when I made my transition out to Southern California to Forest Lawn Memorial Park, they hired me on the spot, and I was trained in their environment, is that I learned not to sell anymore. I learned to let people buy it,
Right.
use them, and help them buy the product instead of selling the product. And that was a big change. And I did that well. And I trained other people in the field who came down from the training center, and I would take them out and get them started, or they would fall out because, I would tell them, I said, if you're successful, it's your credit. If you fail, it's not my fault.
Right. I'm curious, and I apologize for going back in time just a tad again. What
Okay.
was your reaction with the clergy and the group you were with when you left?
Yeah, they probably thought I have friends still connected there,
Good.
but that's a real they didn't shun me, but they didn't approve of it at
Right.
all. And I think they didn't understand,
Was that,
I think we all grew up and understood more later.
yeah. Was that, do you think, the first time you felt maybe no longer a victim? Because it sounds like that's like the first time you made a decision for you.
Yes, yeah. That was a turning point.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then, like I say, I struck out on my own with my choices and my decisions.
Right.
And they took me to California,
Right.
to the place that I had visited before. I knew more about Forest Lawn Memorial Park when I went to work for them than most of the people who ever worked there. I had visited that place, in that case, probably 10 years before. I was amazed by it. It's the most amazing cemetery, privately owned cemetery. Okay. Arlington is by far the most awe-inspiring and humbling place. But Forest Lawn Memorial Park, Southern California, is the most amazing privately owned cemetery in America. And
What makes a cemetery amazing?
um, the artwork, they have their own museum. They have amazing replications of all of Michelangelo's work.
Huh.
Every bit of his work is replicated there. People get married at Forest Lawn Memorial Park. There's 3 churches in the park itself, 385 acres.
Wow.
And people get married there because it's so beautiful and the setting is so nice.
What gave you such an appreciation for art and beauty like that, do you think?
Well, I'm not a real art aficionado, but I appreciate the
But you
fact that
appreciate
it
it, right?
drew people there and it
Ah,
comforted people there. And Forest Lawn Memorial Park, Glendale, is on the elementary school field trip experience for all of Los Angeles.
huh.
They bring kids there to see what's going on there. And so I'm very proud of my work there. I enjoyed the work there. The only problem was it was in Southern California, which is
Right.
not my place to be.
Right.
Okay, and I trained in the field, and then I became a sales manager in Orange County, and I have 1 degree of separation from probably 15,000 salespeople,
Huh.
Forest Lawn,
Right.
because they had a gentleman by the name of Bob who came down from the training center. They said, Jim, we don't think he's going to make it, but we've got to let him come down and work with you and give him a shot. I said, okay. And I took Bob and we went out and he started selling cemetery property. And when I left Forest Lawn in 1981, he took my job. And then 2 years later, they moved him up to the training center and made him the trainer for every salesperson at Forest Lawn Memorial Park for the next 22 years.
What was a spark you gave him that he didn't have until he met you?
I taught him to listen.
Huh.
I taught him to look. Because when you go to someone's home, as soon as you pull up on the drive, it's just like a real estate person. It's that you look and see what's in the driveway. You look and see how they're taking care of the house. You get in the home, you look at the walls and you see the pictures of the kids and you see the things they value. And what we brought to them was an opportunity to protect the children from a very difficult time, normally the wife from a very difficult time. And if they have that responsibility, we're not selling, they're just making that peace of mind purchase.
Right. When did you discover that skill as important as it was? Because for someone that was likened to be the center of attention, to be liked, you're joking, that's not listening. But all of a sudden now we are at a place in our lives where you're seeing the impact and the value of listening.
Mhm.
When did that come?
I think it's always been there. I think I was an observer as a kid. When
Right.
you're told to sit down and be quiet, what else are you going to do? You're going to look.
Right.
You're going to participate by looking and watching the discussion between adults. So watching what they're watching on TV and watching their reaction, to what they're seeing on TV, if it's emotional, if it's exciting, and we're all observers, but I think then I was a subconscious observer.
Right.
And then when it became time to make money from it, I became a very conscious observer.
Right.
And that's what I've tried to accentuate ever since. And what I still do in the training, you talk about what you hear and what you see, because you want to affect that. You want to be you want to take that in and use whatever they give you. And they give you plenty, by what's on the wall, what they're wearing, if they got logo, everybody's giving you data. I take all the
Absolutely.
data.
All right. So we're the master salesman of plots at the cemetery. We
Mhm.
appreciate art. We're teaching others how to listen intently to become successful in their lives. So how does the Army start, and how do we find our path to be an interrogator?
Well, we have to take one more step.
Okay, what
I
is
came
it?
back to the Midwest and I had the two cemeteries that I managed. There was a new radio station that opened up in Wickliffe, Kentucky, WBCE.
Sorry, I'm so sorry I forgot about the radio station. This is important.
10 on your radio dial. Handsome Jimmy James own Pyle Esquire, just another pretty face wasted on radio. And so I went to them, it was a new radio station. I said, guys, I'm going to come to work for you. They said, really? I said, yeah, I really want to do this. And what's it take? And they said, well, we'll give you a shot. Also, the fact they were interested in my ability to sell, because radio is not about entertainment. It's about selling time.
Right.
So a trade-off was I would sell radio time for them, and then let me become, a disc jockey on air. And so I after several failed days of being a knucklehead, I finally got where I could put music on, do the news, transfer back to the Kentucky network, blah, 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 blah. And they could leave me alone in the studio, and I would learn to talk to nobody. I talked to everybody by talking to nobody.
Right.
And that was a helpful thing, I think, as I look back. But I changed radio stations to KDEX in Dexter, Missouri. And on October 23rd, I think, of 1983, there was a bombing at the embassy in Lebanon,
Right.
Marine barracks. I was working that morning in the studio by myself, and back in the newsroom where you had a teletype, and it would type out, just sound like a typewriter typing.
Right.
And if it was an important news story, there was a bell that would ring, ding, 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 ding. It started ringing that morning, and it never stopped till 6 o'clock that night when I closed the radio station down. But that story came out, and it talked about the suspected bombing, maybe 2 Marines killed. And I saw that story build, and I saw it come to life, and I saw the reaction around the world. And tied into that with I'd seen the Iraqi embassy, which happened back like 3 years before then, where the Americans were taken captive for 444 days.
So the Iranian, right?
Yeah, the Iranians, excuse me. And I said, I owe something to this. And I joined the Army in January of '84, a couple 3 months later. And I walked away from them. The first offer they gave me an offer of a job I didn't want. I walked out, that's I learned that to be a great sales, okay, I'm gone.
What was the first thing they offered you?
It was something to do with electronics and stuff.
Okay.
And, I had radio in me and stuff, but that wasn't suiting to me. So I left, and they called me back 2 days later, and my scores were such that they were interested in me, what I could bring to the Army. And I said, well, here's what I want. I said, I want a job in Intel. I want to go to Fort Leonard Wood for basic training. I want to go right away. And I want you to pay me some extra money too. And I got all 4 of those. And 6 days later, I'm in Fort Leonard Wood in basic training. waiting for a $4,000 bonus when I get done with language school and going to Fort Huachuca to become an interrogator.
What made you aware that that world existed about Intel and that world? I mean, how did you find out about that?
My first wife, I was married to my first wife at the time. Her brother was in the Army. And in truth, he was the reason I never wanted to join the Army, because I thought they were all like him.
Right.
And he didn't represent Army values well. But I just, listening and talking, I had seen some literature, before I went, of all the different fields in the Army. And, they were advertising, on the TV real well, like they don't do as much now as they used to, but used to a lot of advertising stuff. And so I just did a little homework in a short period of time and came with a plan. And it certainly turned out well for me.
Yeah.
That's why we're here today.
Absolutely. So you get into Army Intel, interrogation track, send you to the language school. That is pretty remarkable. I didn't even know those things existed when I was looking at the military. So what did we learn when we did that? What was the next step?
That interrogation is nothing but sales.
Right.
It's just sales. And I can do that because, again, you can lead a horse to water, can't make them drink.
Right.
But if you make them thirsty, they'll drink all by themselves. And that's really the interrogator's job, is to get somebody to want to do something, not to make them do something.
Right.
Because if they're fearful or if they feel threatened, they're going to tell you something that might not be truth and it might not be helpful. But if you really want accurate information, not intelligence yet, but if you want accurate information, if you want to get reliable operational information, you have to have a reliable source, and you have to be able to trust what they're going to tell you. Forged by trust. And I see the book over your shoulder, Trust. It's all about trust.
With yours, control the conversation right there.
It's all about trust. And so there's two things that people will not give you freely: money and information.
Right.
And sales, you get the money. And interrogation, you get the information. It's the same thing, because they have to believe you, trust you. And I might have to manage some of the truth in the process, but a lot of people have trouble with the word manipulation. So I don't even use that word. I manage the situation. I manage the information.
One of the most profound things I took away from your book, your first book, was there is a big difference between interview and interrogation and spy recruiting. It's kind of like, to me, it's a Venn diagram with a great overlap in between, from your perspective of what an interview is or an interrogation compared to like recruiting a spy. Where's one begin and one end?
As far as interrogation, you have a captive audience.
Right.
You manage them, you control them. They need you, okay, more than you need them, in essence. But in spy recruiting, you need them. They don't need you. That's the difference.
Yeah, it's really a great analogy just made there in the fact that you're right. I have never had the ability to have a captive audience. No one ever had to talk to me.
Going to hold on to that word. In interrogation, you have a captive audience. In spy recruiting, you have to captivate your audience.
And it's interesting. You have to captivate your audience by allowing them to captivate themselves with you.
Yeah.
And so when you're interrogating and you have a captive audience that has no choice, they have to be there with you. How do you forge that kind of trust where you're dealing with a hostage, basically?
Well, you look for commonality, and you find those commonalities that you can address. If you go in and you have all the information, you got all the dossiers, and you got all the papers, and you put them down there, like, we know everything about you, we know what we're going to do with you, and we don't care what you think and stuff. There's not much rapport there.
Right.
But if we go in with nothing more than a piece of paper and a pencil and say, what are you doing here? How did you get here? I haven't even had time to look at your stuff, and start from discovery.
The origin.
Even though I might know everything I need to know, I don't want to be so smart.
Right.
I don't want to know everything. I want to know what he knows, or how I want to see what he presents to me first.
What a great statement you just said. I don't want to be so smart. That is a great outlook to have when initiating any conversation with anyone.
I
Because
I
it
think it
keeps,
would be valuable.
yeah, it keeps you so open.
Mhm. Because then if he tells me who he is, I find out a little bit where he's from. He has a family. Boom, we have commonality. I have a family, and we're both here in a faraway place for a long time. We don't know how long, and so we have a commonality. And I try to make sure that I connect with those feelings. And then of course, if there's nothing else that we can talk about, we can certainly talk about food. And
Right.
everybody should watch the Food Network, because that's we all eat. And when there's nothing else to talk about, we can talk about food.
I have done the same thing and totally love these conversations of surrounding favorite family traditions and foods growing up.
Yeah, yeah. Thanksgiving's coming, and that's a great time here in the Pyle house with a lot of other families. The same way, it's our favorite meal of the year.
Yeah.
Everybody participates, and everybody looks forward to it.
It's so funny. You said it's the favorite meal of the year, but I think as I've listened to you for the last 45 minutes now, I think
Oh, really? Oh my gosh.
I know. And we still have to get touchstone on the Conversation Codex in a minute, which
Okay, okay.
which is about, but I imagine, you called it the favorite meal of the year. Okay, but it's the reason to get together, because I imagine it's not necessarily the meal, it's the relationships that people are sharing together, which is the favorite part of it.
Yeah, yeah. It's that one time where if there's tension in the family, we kind of let it go. If there's stress, we let it go. We come together, and everybody has their part that they play. Everybody has that thing they do,
Right.
And my wife, she has to orchestrate all of that, and but we all have a part to play. We all do it. We all play our part, and the girls, as they get older, I have two girls that still are home for Thanksgiving, and
Beautiful.
they have their part, and it's just changed over the years, and it's been fun to see what they used to do. They used to only got to lick the spoons, and they never did dishes. But now to see them bring their own accent to the food and their own ideas to the table, it's really it's a really great warm, fire in the fireplace traditional kind of thing.
Especially for the man who grew up feeling alone.
Yeah.
Jim, let's talk about the Conversation Codex. It's the title of your next
Okay.
it's the title of your next book. We're definitely going to have to get together again to dive deeper on all these different areas, but I really wanted to frame the background of who you are today came from, because it's so important for people to see you're literally living who you were meant to be. And it's
Okay.
culminating in that Conversation Codex. What is the Conversation Codex?
That is an element that I feel like I can address. Last summer, I was ready to tell some of my coworkers that I work with. I'm an independent contractor for training for DoD. That I was going to just kind of slow it down and pull back come January of 2023, and thought it was because I'm 72. I thought it's a good time to just kind of relax a bit. But I attended the Behavior Panel Live event in Las Vegas, and I never smiled more in a week's time. I never forgot about the clock more in a week's time. I'm a clock guy. Okay.
Right.
And once each day started, I was oblivious to time.
Beautiful.
I was in the energy that was there. It was a great event. I went there to see the behavior panel, all four of those guys, and they saw me. And they made me feel like I've still got something more to say. I still got something more to do. And I came back from there, and I stewed and distilled that for a while. And I said, my favorite country music singer is Merle Haggard. And they always called him the poet of the common man. Well, I want to be the guy who can help the common conversation.
That is just a beautiful thing to do. Absolutely. Keep going. Sorry. I love that.
and so, because common conversations really get uncommon results.
Right.
If you do them well, if you're curious, if you're serious, if you care. These conversations connect to people. And, I've been connected to more people in more ways and more places since that event. And I thank every one of you guys to allow me to tell my story. And so Conversation Codex is my way of offering to anybody in their position, their place, a way to use some time-tested models for contemporary communication, for today's talk, and the old stuff still works. Old guys still know stuff. And that's why I have a Gmail account right now. It's called Still Know Stuff.
Yep.
Still Know Stuff. And that's going to be my anchor right now until I get my webpage up. And I need to be smarter about those kind of things. I'm a pencil and paper guy, very analog. And so I have a lot of work to do yet to get my webpage up. But I want it to be a place that people can come and visit with me, and I can help them with who they are, where they are. I have a lot of opportunity, I think, to help people who are timid to talk. I don't call them introverts, who are timid to talk, so they could learn to be more comfortable being uncomfortable and talking to people. And the first thing that I offer them, and my daughter just came down the other day holding a book, and she's reading aloud. And I said that would help her because you need to get comfortable with your voice. She's a very inside person. And said, so read aloud, talk to yourself aloud, everything you're doing all day, and hear your voice.
Right.
And then it won't be so stressful when you talk with other people. And so she was reading about Aristotle, all things in the book and stuff. And then how to help people engage people they don't know in a simple little fashion of form. I have a lot of my stuff is car stuff. So I say, do a drive-by. And when you walk by somebody, look at their logo or look at something and just say something about it other than, hello, how you doing? Kind of thing. But just keep walking, don't stop, because you manage the event. And then next time you get comfortable with that, stop and talk to somebody. And then that's a hit and run. The first one's a drive-by, this is a hit and run. Stop, say something, talk to them. If they talk back, stay with them a minute and then move on. And then ride along if you're in line with people to the store, talk to people, anybody, everybody. And then pretty soon you'll find yourself pulling over to park and visit with people for a while. And maybe you can throw up a roadblock when you say stop somebody because you got to talk to them. You want to talk to them. And you've gotten to that level where you're comfortable engaging people.
Well, you were born to walk this path of being a teacher, mentor, and guide to making the world a better place through a better conversation. So thank you. It's beautiful. Jim, the time flies by when we're having a great conversation. What is something that you wanted to share that I was a horrible host and I forgot to ask you?
No. I'm grateful for the 2 books I've written. I just found out yesterday that my 3rd book is being funded, and now we're in 2nd gear.
Awesome.
And through the winter, I'll be writing a sample title, might be called Body Talk Animated. We take animation isolation and use those teaching elements from animated movies. Animators are the greatest illustrators of body language on the planet.
Yeah, you bet.
And animated movies is the freest avenue to learn body language and have fun doing it. And so it's going to be the big kids guide to body language. We're targeting a younger audience. And we have a serious approach to that, more than just learning body language. We think kids need to be armed with that skill set. Absolutely. Because they're vulnerable where they are. And kids need to be armed with observation skills and body language skills that they could look and see where they might be at risk and maybe protect themselves and friends. And that's part of it, not all of it, but that's a part of it that we want to really affect.
And what a great thing you're doing with that too, because that's the age when we are really so self-centered. We think the world's looking at us, and you're really going to teach skills that are going to start forcing them to interact a little more healthy by get outside yourself and observe others in an objective observation way and be curious, which is going to be the greatest skills you can impart on them. Jim, I can't thank you enough for being a part of my life, for coming on the show, sharing your incredible journey that you've had and where you're going tomorrow. And where can people tune in to find out more about you?
Well, just get in touch with me here.
I love it. It's still no stuff at gmail.com. He's got it on his whiteboard. If you're listening to the podcast, I'll make sure it's in the show notes. Fantastic, Jim. So Jim is in our circle of world here. So keep tuning in and keep checking him out as he provides his amazing services to humanity through a great conversation. Jim, thanks a lot for coming on.
And to your listeners.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Forged by Trust. Remember, if you want to forge trust, it's not about how you make people feel about you that matters, it's how you make them feel about themselves. If you're interested in more information about how I can help you forge your own trust-building, communication, and interpersonal strategies as your coach or as a trusted advisor for your organization, please visit my website at www.peopleformula.com. I'm looking forward to sharing my next Forged by Trust episode with you next week when we chat with Scott Rouse and Rockstar Body Language.